We'll call the Board of Public Works meeting of Monday, October 14th to order. Number 2, approval of the minutes of September 30th. Motion by Mr. Fires, second by Mr. Bargander. Comments, questions, corrections? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Citizens' comments, go ahead. Yep, over there, please. State your name and address.
My name is Jeff Moulter. I live at 1525 Adler Road in Marshfield, Wisconsin. I wasn't sure I was going to be available to come to the next meeting in regards to this, so I thought I should show up tonight. I wanted to speak in opposition of the proposed residential build on the lot directly north of myself with the 13 pocket homes and 3 residentials. I don't have any problem with the land being developed. Actually, I'd love to see it developed. It's been vacant since we've lived there. I would like to see like housing built as opposed to pocket homes. And I'd also like to see the zoning kept the same throughout that entire block, if that's an available option for us. I just don't think that this would be conducive to the flow of the neighborhood or the other residents that are there.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to number 4, presentation of annual wastewater rate review, presented by I'm gonna slaughter Severson from Strand Associate.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the city and for hiring Strand to form this year's rate study for the wastewater utility. I'll review the summary letter here with this year's review for the 2020 budget year. I'll begin with the projected revenue requirements shown in Table 1. It's enclosed with that letter, which summarizes the total revenue requirements for the 2020 rates. The indicated revenue requirement is just under $6.1 million. This is an increase from the previous year of about 1.7%. The O&M budget is about $200,000 more than the 2019 budget. And then as well as there is a $375,000 replacement contribution included for 2020 due to the age of the wastewater treatment plant equipment, which is the same as what was budgeted in 2019. In addition, there's the capital improvement plan contribution of about $1.6 million, which is similar to the previous year. And the debt service payment for 2020 decreased by about $84,000 because of 2009 general obligation notes were paid off in this year. So with the current utility rates, those are shown in Table 2, which I won't review in detail. Existing rates were adopted January 1st of last year. We compared these rates for generating revenues for the 2020 budget year, and we are projecting these existing rates to meet the 2020 revenue requirements. We also reviewed the water billings, and you can see in Figure 1 shows the historic water billing volumes over a decade here. And past couple years, there's been some variability. So continuing with what we did for 2019 rates, we used the 2017 water billing volumes as the most recent low to continue to be conservative for revenue generation. I'd also add that the surcharge billings have increased over the past several years. The plant has also increased revenues from hauled waste. So with this year's rate projections, we see an increase in surcharge revenues and projected an increase in hauled waste revenues. Due to these increases, we're projecting the 2020, the current rates to meet your 2020 budget year revenue requirement. So from our review, is our recommendation that you can maintain the current rates for the next year.
I would just like to say, I was always one to make sure that we never had double-digit increases again. And I got to give a attaboy to Sam and his staff with the hauling waste and all the other things you've done to make it so that we did have to have an increase. So they should receive a big thank you for what they do down there. And I would entertain a motion to approve. Motion by Mr. Fire, second by Mr. Jockey. Questions? Steve?
I'll just ask one. Just playing devil's advocate for the sake of discussion, Phil. If someone from the public hears this and says, well, wait a minute, there's a day coming when they're going to have to, upgrade their equipment, build a new plant or whatever, what would our best response to that be?
So far, the plant has an equipment replacement fund that they've been funding for the past 20 years. So that has been a requirement to the Clean Water Fund loan. So they have a fund in place for the eventual replacement of that equipment.
That question is really for the benefit of people who might be watching us. I mean, I pretty well knew the answer. I want people to understand, because like Tom was saying, they might think, boy, we're going to keep up with where we need to go without a rate increase. And otherwise, I just thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, Phil. All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. And thank you, Sam. Tell your staff, good job. Number 5, approval of 2020 housing incentive project, presented by Josh Miller, Development Services Director. Josh.
Thank you. If you recall, for the past, I would say, year or so, we've been working on this housing incentive program to really open up infrastructure to develop more lots, basically, or provide more additional single and two-family lots. Ultimately, we developed a program that was adopted back in August. We put the application available to the public and put out a notice, press release and such. And we're hoping to get some applications. And we did receive 2 by the deadline, which was last Monday. And so we're presenting the 2 that were proposed. We did have another one that was kind of tentative, but just because of the shortened deadline, and this is a pretty busy season for contractors, it's tough to get stuff in and collect information. Next year, our application deadline is in July, which is also a busy time, but at least there'll be a little bit more heads up because that gives us a chance for the Public Works Department to design the streets, give them a little more time. Right now, we're kind of on a short timeline. So the 2 projects, the first one is a Prairie Run Group in the Prairie Run subdivision. They're looking to extension of Prairie Drive as a temporary cul-de-sac. So that cul-de-sac eventually would be extended as future phases are added. But this would open up 4 single-family lots on the east side, which are already platted. And then there would be 6, and I mistakenly called them townhouse lots, that they were, that's the way it was in the application. But technically, after talking to the developer, they're really just single-family homes on additional lots, but they're smaller scale. So that was so. I just wanted to make that clarification in the terminology in the staff report. So they'd be adding approximately 550 feet of construction or new infrastructure to the temporary cul-de-sac. Be about 3.2 acres, or the density would be about 3.2 units per acre, which is adequate in there. The average value per home. So on the smaller side, on the west side, they'd be between $325,000 and $400,000 to build. And then on the east side would be about $400,000 to $550,000 to build. And so the estimated revenue or value of the property would be about $4.1 million. That still obviously would have to be assessed. We get taxes based on assessed value, not on construction, but that gives us a rough cost. So when we looked at this project and evaluated it, we looked at some of the possible considerations of, extending an existing development. And as I said, this would be a temporary cul-de-sac, so there'd be opportunity to develop beyond it. And that's one of the bonuses of this development. It does identify some of the following housing study gaps, or housing gaps identified in the housing study. I said inadequate supply of condominiums and townhouses, which obviously that's not the case now, so that was not accurate, but an inadequate supply of desirable owner-occupied housing over $250,000. So it really covers one of the main gaps in the housing study, and then also allows for an extension of future development. So that's a bonus in this project. And the second project would be the Lincoln and Adler project that Jeff had spoken about earlier in a citizen comment. This concept plan right now has not really been vetted through zoning, so there's still opportunities to modify the layout. And I think those are things that we would work with the developer on. But right now, as proposed, he's got 13 pocket homes. And what a pocket home really is it's taken from the term pocket neighborhood, which is really intended to have a different kind of layout. So the homes would be really more kind of bunched together, higher density, and then you'd have more of a community area. And the way it's termed in this case is more of a condo style, like a smaller style home, probably about a 1,100 square foot footprint, 2-bedroom. There would be a basement in these, 2-car garage. And those would be the 13 kind of on the north and east side of the development around the cul-de-sac. And then the southern 3 lots would be a little bit of larger home, probably closer to 1,400 square feet, 3-bedroom, but still kind of a smaller footprint. So the pocket homes were about 160,000 to build, and then the larger home was about 210,000. And so just to address Jeff's comments about the neighborhood and the surrounding homes and stuff, these would be smaller. So that's definitely, I'm sure it's something that we would hear about. We do have to rezone the property in order to accommodate this development, whether it's a higher density zoning or a planned unit development or even a conditional use permit. So there would be additional steps and public hearings to take place with that. And then all the neighboring properties within 200 feet would be notified of that. So they'd have an opportunity to speak to that and address those concerns if this does get approved for funding. Talking about and again, I had a typo in the value for this property. I had 3.7, it was 2.7 million, which is what the total value is for all the homes as constructed. So looking at the considerations, these are 1-story, all of them would be 1-story. With the pocket homes would be two-bedroom ranches with 2 stall garages. They may have some reconstruction for the existing trail because there's a low point there that the trail goes right along Lincoln Avenue there, which is where they're coming off of for the cul-de-sac. It would have to extend water to the site because it doesn't really exist on Lincoln currently. Would need to be some type of rezoning effort. As I mentioned, the houses and lots are smaller than the current surrounding homes, so that's definitely a factor that can be considered. And you can see in the layout there, it's pretty high density. They're really bunched together, so I think there's an opportunity to maybe reconfigure that a little bit or spread it out a bit. Again, we got these on Monday, so we're trying to process them as is. The one thing is that there does look to be like a gazebo or some type of common area that would be an amenity, and it would have nearby trail access. So a pretty big benefit in that neighborhood. The one thing where this is differentiated from the Prairie Run development, this is just a cul-de-sac. There's no future extension of road, so there's no additional development beyond this cul-de-sac. But it does address a need in a gap in the housing study, which is adequate supply of housing under 200,000. So, the way you can really address that is by building higher density and smaller footprint of homes. And we can see, we know that there's a demand for these types of homes because of just kind of the whole aging in place or aging in home situation. If elderly people want to downsize as they're empty nesters and they maybe don't need to take care of a yard or don't need space. And so having a smaller home, I think we've heard that from other developers that's actually desirable, and the price point is low enough for both starter homes and probably elderly homes. So this, all in all, we're pretty pleased that we did get 2, I think, good applications for this program. When looking at the total cost of infrastructure, we're probably, again, these are really rough numbers. We haven't had a chance to go through and detail it, but we're looking at probably $540,000 to $610,000 with the 2 projects combined. If you recall, our budget is $500,000 a year. The developer would be responsible for paying 10% of that up front. And then the city would cover 40 to 60% or 50 to 60% of that. And the remaining portion would be repaid through special assessments. And so, so there's the total improvement estimated value is about $6.8 million. So if you look at that and the city's tax rate over the course of the number of years that we, over the amount of money that the city would be investing in, it would almost pay back in about 5 years once everything's built out. So if that all holds true, that's a pretty good investment, I think, for the city. We'd be looking at about 980 feet of new infrastructure. And if you recall back in our strategic plan, we wanted to do about 1,000 feet of new infrastructure for housing. So we're getting close to that number. And it'll be interesting to see what bids come back at in this over winter and in the spring, just so we can kind of see what that actually costs to develop new infrastructure for new housing. We have kind of a ballpark number we've been using, but so in reality, the city costs based on the range of a housing or the special assessments that we could get back, the city's costs would ultimately be about $250,000 to $300,000. So that's not too bad, I think, for $6.8 million of new development. So as I laid out in the staff report, we are seeking a recommendation to approve both projects. But we did have that range of 50 to 60% support. We felt that the Prairie Run Group project meets a little more of the needs in the housing study and allows for additional development. So we were recommending a higher percentage of reimbursement versus the Adler and Lincoln one. The board could look to set that right now, or they could just direct staff to work that out with the developers through the development agreement. But at this time, staff is looking to recommend approval of both the Prairie Run project and the Lincoln and Adler project for the Housing Incentive Program, and ask that you direct staff to verify cost estimates and put together a development agreement for common council consideration and approval.
Question, Mike?
The townhouses, we don't have it laid out. Let me see here, because what's going to happen is he's going to lay out probably the first 4 initially as part of the initial phase, and then they're planning on updating the planned unit development, which will require some additional lots. So I don't think that's fully laid out right now, but if looking at the townhouses, there's 68,000 square feet, give or take, for all 6. Oh, pocket homes or the townhouses? Pocket homes. Well, they're all on one lot, so they'd all be it'd be a condo basically. So they're not. Let me just see if I can. Yeah, so there's 13. So they're less than. They'd be less, probably about 9,000 square foot allocated per home. Probably less than that. They're deeper lots. They're about 130 feet deep. But yeah, there's not a lot of room in between. So we're hoping to maybe reconfigure those so you could get kind of groups of 4 together instead of the way it's all laid out. Same as my neighborhood.
Okay, do you have anything else, Mike? Okay, anybody else? Mr. Jockett?
10 feet between these buildings, is that code?
Minimum of 10, so they'd have to be, the foundation would be less or more than that. So that's why I said the layout doesn't quite work, I don't think, for zoning or code, and those are things that we have to work out and probably either spread out. You might lose a unit or 2, depending on how that all works out. But this was a concept plan to kind of show what his thoughts were.
Mr. Bargander?
I think this is going to have to be revamped here because, you got 10 feet in between, what is the water runoff on these roofs? How is that going to affect? You've got all these cars, you've got all this snow. Just imagine a year like we just went through a winter season with all that snow and all these little driveways packed together. I don't see where these people are going to have a real good time managing their snow and their water runoff if this would be the concept that would get approved, which I surely hope wouldn't. That's my concern. Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Jockett?
Well, he was going to respond to that.
Oh, I get just a drive. If you look at the surrounding properties in this neighborhood, I bet mostly would have a shorter setback than that. And even if we would go to a conventional setback for most homes, we have a 7.5 foot side yard setback. So in a conventional development, you're at 15 feet. Usually you're a little more, but that's the minimum setback. So an extra 5 feet. We can kind of gear towards or push towards that a little bit more, but I think we want to encourage density. So I think 10, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I totally understand what you're saying, but I think that this isn't too dissimilar to a lot of neighborhoods in the area, and especially in this area.
Go ahead,
The
Chris.
comment I would have in response to that, though, is we don't build houses like this anymore. Just because people want space. So-
Chris, would you put your mic up, please?
It's on, I just need to speak to it.
Yeah, thank you.
There, you know, that we don't build houses like we do in these neighborhoods anymore, and that's part of the problem when one goes down. For whatever reason, we can't rebuild on it because we generally don't do that. So, you know, yes, it's been done in the past, but we haven't been encouraging in any city that project. And Mike was just saying that we've seen this in other communities, and yeah, I've seen some of these and the communities I've been visiting, and they are really, really tight. I'm not sure in Marshfield whether this is the best, but I don't know that that's what you're asking us to approve. What exactly is our, well, there are two things. One is a concern. What research has been done to know that this is a pretty radical concept for Marshfield, that this is going to fly here, you know?
Well, I think just based on talking to developers, and it's all anecdotal. I mean, to be fair, but we have heard that there's an interest in this. Obviously, this price point, the housing study has identified that, and the like I talked about the aging in place and having a smaller footprint. You know, I think about my house. My house is a little bit bigger than these, but we don't use a good chunk of it. So, I mean, I would actually be okay with a house this size in a bedroom. But I think that there would be appeal to different demographics, both younger and older. But yeah, to have definitive research, no other than the housing study supporting that and anecdotal hearing from developers.
Yeah, and it goes back to our discussion we've been having for the last 6 years of, you know, affordable housing under 200,000 being built in other communities. And I've never understood why that can't come here. That would be compatible with this neighborhood and with some other. And I guess I'd be interested in hearing, because I don't know who's on the housing committee, what discussions they had and what research they did, and if they even went over and spoke to someone in Wastewater. I know we have had some contact up there, but you know, developers, Wastewater, Wausau, Weston, I understand it's a different kind of a community, but one developer we work with put up over 200 homes in the last 3 years. And those are on a 1/4 acre lot, 3-car garage, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. You know, this worries me as far as subsidizing it, because it's definitely a new concept. And I'm not sure we're ready for to the houses this tight, this small, in here. And the other end, I'm not sure I'm comfortable subsidizing $400,000 home.
Okay, just keep in mind, we're not subsidizing homes, we're building infrastructure. I want to
I
make
get
that clear.
that, but they're asking for our assistance to do that. And quite frankly, Prairie Run was the one that fought us when we wanted to do a subdivision, when 3 years ago we were hoping. I don't know. I guess so we're putting in the infrastructure. That's what you're.
Well, basically, we're asking for direction to move forward with these projects, to work on a development agreement. The city would ultimately bid out the project and oversee the construction of it. And that road, the right of way would have to be dedicated in this case. But yeah, we're overseeing that basically, and you know, but then we own the road. So I mean, it's in the past, we haven't really invested in recent years in residential infrastructure, single family and 2-family, like this. So without this investment, these projects wouldn't go forward. Now, it's certainly up to the board if you guys don't feel that these are the right projects, but I mean, we've been working on this to get these types of projects. And I mean, that would basically kill one or both of them if that was the direction.
Well, I understand we've been working on it, but the discussion has been at a different level than here.
If I could, I'm going to ask Dan to respond to that because, Josh, we spent a fair amount of time, I'm talking as a EDB member, and we compared, Dan put some numbers together and talked about what the Wausau area was doing. And what I'm getting at, Dan, is the cost of the infrastructure. They did different things there. Didn't have the same standards on the roads that we do because we were looking for long-term. If you could respond to that, please.
Yeah, I didn't have contact with the Wausau developer.
Right.
I think Josh may have, but my understanding is they're not putting in curb and gutter and storm sewer and that type of thing. And they have more sandy soils in there, so drainage is a lot easier to deal with. That helps keep the cost of the infrastructure down. Again, the city's contribution is going to get the infrastructure developed here. We're not making payments to the developer out of this program. The hang up and why we're not seeing any new residential subdivisions in years, and it's been 10 years or more since we've seen any, is the cost of the infrastructure. So this whole program is geared at, let's figure out how we can get infrastructure built, and then the developer will take care of getting the lots developed. So we have a little different standard here on infrastructure, and that's what Tom's referring to as far as wanting the curb and gutter and storms.
It's pay me now or pay me later. Mr. Fire.
I'm not so sure that this is the concept we want, but anybody that's building a small pocket, a home in this town on an old lot, they're gone. They buy them right up. Build them, they'll buy them. I don't know any small house that's available after it's been built. People like them, especially our age or older. They got the big house and they want to peddle it, and they sell their house and buy this and they're happy as a lark. So you gotta realize this community is getting older. It's going to keep getting older. It just seems to be leading that way. But I don't know about the big fight on this neighborhood. We'll have to see how that works. But I think we should move forward and see if we can get some.
Mr. Jokic, I didn't mean to cut you off. You have more comments.
If we could, I'm not sure what standards and what requirements we have versus, what's going on up in other areas. Whether we could, lower our standards a little bit to keep the cost down, whether that would matter. I don't know. I just don't get it. I just don't know that. I guess if we're just putting in the streets, I guess maybe that's not quite subsidizing. But I'm not comfortable with either one of them, quite frankly. This isn't where I'd like to see our city contribution going towards that. I think the pocket neighborhoods I worry about that being successful, given the size. I think maybe if there's more space in between, but we're a rural community. We're not urban. We're not struggling for space. I don't think, and I don't think given the rest of the neighborhood here, all of a sudden having these, this high of a density, is doing anything, for the existing neighborhood. And Prairie Run, that was a private development. It was always meant to be a private. I'm not sure why we are contributing toward it. I get that it will open it up, and hopefully we will be, seeing some progress made there. But if there was a real demand, they could have been putting these. And I just have any contribution towards that value house. I'm not sure I would like to see the government at all involved.
I have to urge my fellow members of the board. We spent a long time. We didn't just rush into this idea. The Housing Incentive Committee looked at that, and like Dan said, we didn't have any development going on for 10 years. Now we do with this program. I think we need to start. And Josh is not talking that it's got to be like you see it here. You can tweak this. I think we need to go forward with this in some fashion let him come back with something after talking with the developer. My God, we've got two places that they want to build. We just started this program. If we knock it down now, I don't think that sounds good for us. Chris, did you have another comment?
Well, only that, I'm not privy to any of that. I couldn't make any of the EDB meetings to know if there's a housing committee. I don't know who's on it. I don't know what discussions they have. No one's coming here and saying, this is what we looked at, this is what we looked at, and this is why we are recommending this. So I guess I'm a little concerned about that.
But
I've been involved in building enough, and I see what's going on. I guess I would really like to see exactly why it can work on those, because those are larger lots. That's what you see in a more rural community. I'm not saying that this will work, but I'm not sure that it will be successful given the small houses 10 feet apart. But we need various types of housing, and it's just me that's concerned about it, and we'll go.
Yeah, my last comment on all this is, I understand we can't make every meeting. I understand it. But we've got good staff that's looked at this. They've done research on it. We got committee members throughout the city that are in on this to come up with things. Sometimes I think we got to trust them a little bit more than, should I say, micromanage?
No, you're right. There is to do, but we're talking about a fairly good project and something that we've struggled with, new housing. I mean, how many houses do we typically see go up a year?
About 14 right now, but prior to
This year, and it's been less than.
Yeah, previously it had been about 10. So we're gobbling up our available inventory at a pretty good clip here, and so that was the concern, is we don't have anybody else willing to put in the infrastructure. The banks won't lend the money. They couldn't get financing, and it was very risky. So if you've got a local developer, now maybe there's other bigger developers around the state that would come in here, but working with the local developers, if a development goes bad or something and they've got, $400,000 invested in something like that, that could sink them and bankrupt them. So, I mean, they don't have the resources to pay for that up front. And so that's really where this program got kind of developed. And we said we may have to revamp the program next year to see how things go and stuff. So we don't know if this is a silver bullet or a magic bullet to fix the problem, but providing some incentive. We had actually three applications, but the third one really wasn't complete, interested in this program. And to be completely full disclosure, those guys were part of the housing study. So, or the housing committee, some of those guys that are developers. So they had input, they understood the process, and provided some feedback as to what would work. And so nothing else has worked up to this point, really, because we don't have new subdivision.
Mr. Witzel, I think you've been biting your tongue a little bit. Go ahead.
Yes, I have, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk since I'm not technically a part of this particular body. But, I understand the concept of the pocket houses, and I think that the concept of the pocket houses is a really cool concept. But what I see laid out here does not fit at all what I understand of the concept of the pocket house. The concept of the pocket house is like an entire block with houses that line the outside, and then they share a common space in the middle so that they all have equal access to that common space. What I see here are a row of 8 houses. The furthest one away from the common space has really absolutely no opportunity to use that common space of that gazebo as it's shown there. I also see this as being kind of a half a neighborhood rather than that full concept that was presented when you presented the idea of pocket houses. I do agree. I think that there's a need for something like that. I look at what we have for tight housing with, mobile home parks and those types of things. And I think something like this is far more appealing, but I just don't see that this neighborhood is an ideal spot for that. I can see the same development. I can see putting a road in there, and I can see a whole bunch more of those, like lot 1, 2, 3s lining the outside. That is what I think would be a much better fit for this. It fits with what's already there. It's not trying to wedge something into a tiny corner and then saving the concept of a pocket house where it can really be developed the way it was, I think, intended, again, with the houses kind of surrounding that common space in the middle. In terms of the Prairie one, I think sounds great. Let's go for it. But again, I'm not this body's side.
Go ahead, Josh.
No, I think Alderman Witzel has a great point, and I think that's fair, and that's why staff has looked at this concept and suggested some alternatives, and this isn't quite that. But even that with a cul-de-sac, that doesn't quite match a pocket neighborhood, I would agree. But I do think this is going to come back for rezoning. So if ultimately the developer, and part of the DA will be to make sure all the city's approvals are done and all that stuff, but if they come back and the plan commission and council don't agree with the zoning, don't agree with the layout, or have recommended changes, I can go back to the developer and recommend that already. I think we're still in the early stages of this application where we can say, you know what, we almost didn't get funding. We would really like to see this, and that would hold some weight, I think. But so I think anything's still on the table. I think to Mike's point is, I think, and even Tom's is, I think you need to go forward with something because we've worked hard to develop a program, and if this isn't it, we probably need to provide more direction.
Dan?
I was just going to mention that if you think this is a good spot for a subdivision, I'd like to see this move forward. We do need to get started on some engineering and design survey this fall in order to make this bid process over the winter. So regardless of whether this is a pocket home development or a traditional subdivision, the road is essentially the same. What changes is where we stub in sewer and water laterals. So if you think this is a good spot for a subdivision and a cul-de-sac makes sense to you, I would recommend approving this, direct staff to negotiate and work on a development agreement, sort out some of these details. Maybe the final product looks a lot different than what you're seeing tonight, but at least we haven't lost any time in the process here. If we get out another month and we just haven't made any headway on it, then we could just not approve a development agreement. But for tonight, I think it's important to move forward.
Mr. Jacque.
Okay, well, I appreciate hearing that versus trying to, because my assumptions were, this is what we are approving, is this concept versus we're opening up an area. I assume Mr. Faber owns this property,
Not yet.
but he's in the process of buying it.
Yes.
So these are going to be, you were mentioning that this was going to be more of a condo?
The way it's laid out is that was the intent, is to have more of a condo development type thing.
For all of it, including lots 1, 2, and 3?
I think so, but they would be separately owned, but there'd be some maintenance with snowplow and lawn care and stuff.
All right. I guess what, given what Dan was saying is the road, I guess it makes sense for us to go ahead and do that. I just hope that you can work with the developer and get away from this concept, the pocket. But I don't know what that means for payback or that kind of thing if it stretches out. But if this is going to help us develop more housing, that's important. And we're not talking a great deal of money, but we're talking, we're doing this now so that we can get going on the engineering and also know what we have to borrow for next year. Right? Is that why we're doing this now?
Go ahead, Dan.
We want to be in a position to bid this out in spring of 2020.
Right.
In order to do that, we have to have some ground survey done now before the snow flies, so we know what's out there for topo and utilities and so forth. So that engineering process really needs to start soon. We think we have a good idea of what the estimate is. Tom's working on verifying some of the numbers from the developer. So by the time we get through a development agreement here, we'll know that we have enough funding. The 10% developer contribution will cover the cost of the project. And if for some reason the estimates don't match up with what we think they are, then we'd have to talk about how we modify the developer contribution going forward. But so we're still hashing out some of those things. As Josh mentioned, next year we want the application in much earlier, so this process would start sooner and we can be a little bit ahead of the game. But for now, we're kind of on a fast track to get something going here.
So we're looking at borrowing 250?
Yeah,
Our contribution is going to be 250?
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, the council would be, if going forward with this, if they approve the CIP or the budget as what was put in the CIP, $250,000 for this program, the EDB is contributing $250,000 to the program. So the council would be, depending on how, I don't know how we decided to finance it or get that would be the gist of it.
And if they go ahead with this development or whatever, if it doesn't fly, they're still going to be responsible for paying.
We'll have protections. I think it has to have a 5-year payout. And so there's protections in there for us being able to recoup our special assessments. If it doesn't go and we're not getting any tax base on it, that would be essentially our clawback to get that money through special assessments after 5 years. But
All right.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Fire. Do I have a second? Mr. Bargender. Any last comments or questions? Go ahead, Mr. Bargender.
Yeah, I'm all in favor of new development, and I think we really need it. The pocket houses concept here with these 8 houses jammed it together with only 10 feet, I really, really, really seriously would like to see more room between these houses. Like I said earlier, I just couldn't imagine the snow removal off the roofs, runoff from the roofs, parking cars. I just think it seems like a mobile home type of situation where you have these little houses packed together, and you pack a lot of people together, you usually have a lot of problems. So I hope there's some type of adjustment made here to give 5 more feet between houses or something like that, eliminating at least one of these. I just think it would sell better to the public. So thank you.
Okay, are we ready to vote? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Number 6, update for downtown parking team, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator. Steve.
Thank you, Tom. 2 years ago, we went through a process with what we call the downtown parking team. This is made up of roughly a dozen people, city staff, and Main Street downtown business owners and people with an interest in downtown. And came up with a number of recommendations that you have in your packet. They were ultimately embraced by both the Board of Public Works and the council, and they've largely been implemented. So it's been a couple of years. It was time to go back and review it, see if we're making some headway in terms of addressing parking concerns or if something more needs to be done. So we did meet recently, back on September 23rd, got the team back together. And what you have in your packet is a memo for me. I'm just going to kind of outline some of the concerns that were raised. And I want to start out by saying there's not a whole lot of big problems going on downtown. It's not like parking is exploding as a problem or that the recommendations that we implemented 2 years ago have been failures. But just to touch on what was brought up. One of the things we did, we made Omaha and Milwaukee parking lots free, so to speak. In other words, permits are not required. Trying to encourage people to use those 2 lots for longer term daytime parking. And one of the things that came up is that a business located shortly after this was put into place down in the area of 3rd and Central that's had a lot of parking from its employees. And they've been using that lot, which is fine. It's been open parking. But as a result, the Omaha parking lot has not been as available to other downtown customers or other downtown users for long periods of time. So one of the things that came up is that the regular full-time daytime parking in Omaha lot has created a little bit of a crimp in our original plan. Other things that have been brought up is that the desire for more parking along 2nd Street west of Chestnut. That's largely related to the post office, and their desire was to maybe see that made one way and have some possibly angle parking, that type of thing. Availability of parking in the area of Wenzel Family Plaza kind of goes along with that as a concern. 2 that kind of related. One is the need for more on-street parking time for personal care businesses. And we heard this 2 years ago. You're running a hair salon, nails, those kind of things. Oftentimes those appointments take almost 2 hours by themselves. So even if you don't go anywhere else downtown, you come out, you might find a ticket on your car if you were in a 90-minute parking area. So that was raised. Along with that, the idea of parking and drop off for some of the customers of those businesses as well. And then finally, one that I've seen in every city I've worked in, and that's the idea that sometimes owners and managers of downtown businesses will create a problem by themselves by parking in front of nearby businesses or their own business, tying up spaces that is intended to be used or are intended to be used for customers, for themselves and their neighbors. So after discussing it for a while, the team kind of came up with the following 5 things that they would like to go forward. Number 1, return the Omaha parking lot over off the 3rd Maple area to permit parking. And that would kind of reflect the fact that we now have more business use of that, and we'd like to see people securing permits again. Number 2 is to encourage the use of the Milwaukee lot by Chestnut Avenue businesses, the post office in particular, but other businesses over there where they need all-day parking and, don't want to go out and move their car every couple of hours. That'd be an opportunity for them. That lot appears to be far less than full parked most of the time, according to our observations. The third one is a follow-up on one that we had talked about 2 years ago that we didn't really get to the finish line on, and that is clean up and standardize some of the parking signs. If you go from lot to lot, you'll find places where maybe the intention is the same as far as what the parking rules are, but it doesn't read the same, and that could kind of mess with people's minds a little bit. So we want to get to the point of standardizing that as fully as we can. Another thing that came up was the police chief is increasing the tickets to $25. The council has already approved that. So it goes up from 15 to 25. And as that happens now, as we move into the new year, you're also getting a different system for how to track that and how to be able to monitor it. It involves some computer software and that type of thing. So one of the things we decided we'd do is we monitor during the first half of 2020 what the parking behavior is, where the tickets are being issued. Are they all in one block? Are they happening around certain businesses where we can maybe take a look at what the problem might be? And then the final one is just monitoring parking behavior in general during the first half of 2019 or 2020 and get a sense of a little bit more closely, where are the problem areas? I know we've talked about this in the past. This is not new, but where are we still seeing difficulty for people getting spots? These kind of things. The only one of these 5 recommendations that would really require the board action would be if you see fit to approve a motion to return the Omaha parking lot to permit parking. That would still leave just the one lot, as I said, Milwaukee, as a lot that's free from those kind of regulations. And I think given the business activity and the employees parking over there now, that would seem to be warranted. So that would be staff's recommendation. If the board sees fit to approve changing the Omaha parking lot at the west side of Maple Avenue between 3rd and 4th Street back to a permit parking lot.
Motion by Mr. Fire, second by Mr. Bargender. Comments, questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Did you have any questions on anything else that Steve reported? Or we're out.
Yeah, and well, I'll add then before we wrap up, Tom, that, downtown parking is something that you need to monitor all the time. And Kaylee Gomez, the Main Street Marshfield executive director, gives me feedback from time to time. It's kind of a moving target, but we'll try and stay on it as best we can as we head into 2020. We want people to feel comfortable coming downtown, being able to find parking spaces, to shop, to go to restaurants. So we'll definitely stay on it.
Okay, any items for future agendas? Okay, motion to adjourn by Mr. Fire, second by Mr. Bargender. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, we are adjourned. Thank you.